Welcome to the Readings from Oconomowaukee series featuring Boswell Book Company and Books and Company. I'm Daniel from Boswell, and I would love to introduce Lisa Bedoyan from Books and Company, who will be also welcoming you and perhaps even introducing you.
Thank you, Daniel, and welcome everybody. And welcome, Jonathan. Jonathan Evison is joining us tonight. He's the author of 7 novels, including the New York Times bestselling West of Here, and also one of my booksellers' favorites, The Fundamentals of Caregiving. This past summer, Legends of North Cascades was published, and tonight we are chatting about his newest book, Small World. So you've done a lot of work in the past year there, Jonathan, of 2 books. Jonathan lives in Washington State with his family, and I'm sure there it is much, much warmer than it is here. I've got 3 degrees right now. Daniel, what do you have?
It does tell you on the laptop nowadays.
Yeah, it does.
I'm at 6 because I'm closer to the lake.
Well, there you go. No wonder. So, well, thank you all for joining us tonight, and congratulations. Small World has been just receiving great reviews, and we love it. So congratulations, Jonathan.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. We're a balmy, I think about 38, 39 degrees here.
Oh, that is
we
balmy.
were down to 8 though a couple weeks ago. It got pretty cold. I had some frozen pipes, and the family got snowed in for 10 days up at the cabin. And I live for that stuff, man. I love going all Jeremiah Johnson. I was having my groceries delivered like 3 miles away, as close as they could get, because I live at the road end, and I was putting like my cases of beer and all my groceries on a sled and pulling it 3 miles back. I loved it. It's good times.
Sounds good. And it's beautiful country where you're at too. It's one of my favorite places.
Yeah, I'm a little bummed out because we're up against the national forest, and about a mile and a half behind the cabin, I'm the last house, and there's trails that go all the way back in there, but I noticed that they're just clear cutting the hell out of it back there now, man. Made me sad. I cried. It'll grow back, but God, man, it's just ugly. It's too bad.
Yeah, it is ugly when that happens. It is. Yeah. So, Jonathan, Daniel, do you want to start with the first question, or do you want me to?
Well, let's do the classic open. Oh, by the way, what do you want us to? Do you want us? Should we go by Jonathan, or don't you go by Johnny?
I go by Johnny.
Yeah. So
well, I didn't know that.
Well, yeah. I've already. We've done events together. It's a little
smarmy for a book cover, unless you're writing crime fiction. So. Jonathan is my literary name. So
I've had authors ask to change their names to formalize. One person, 2 of our local authors, one was asked to formalize her name, and the other one was asked to like nickname himself. Not to a Johnny kind of thing, but
a Cap or something. I mean,
Cap. Oh. Yes, he writes hat thrillers. So he would definitely write a book about your hat. So, by the way,
I'm wearing my fat shirt, but you can't see it. It's good. It's great. It cuts me off right here. I got all.
Maybe we'll figure out a way to get in the picture later. Do you have like your little? Since you're doing a lot of these events, this is a very high-profile book for Dutton. Do you have like a little elevator? Like, here's what I say when I go on the morning news or the radio, like as the introduction.
Well, I mean, what I talk about is this book all started with the conceit of the thing. It was the eve of my 50th birthday, and I was out of my garage, and something about turning 50 just kind of lit a fire under my ass. I really wanted to swing with the fences for the next book. Not that, I always kind of swing with the fences. All my books are, none of them are without their literary pyrotechnics or, but this one, I really, really wanted to swing for the fences. And I just said, I had all these, I use these 2x3 paperboard posters for notes. And I had them spread all over the pool table and every flat surface, the ping pong table, the pool table. And I had all my colored pens out, and I just said, fuck it, I'm going to write the great American novel. And then I didn't know exactly what that meant. So I had to kind of define what that meant for me at first. And so I was just kind of going through the books that are in that canon, and when it's such a divergent group of titles. I mean, everything from Moby Dick to Lolita, which isn't even written by an American, to The Invisible Man, to The Adventures of Augie March, to Catcher in the Rye. And then I started to think what it meant for me, what is the great American novel. And I started to think about books like Huckleberry Finn and The Grapes of Wrath and you know, The Octopus by Frank Norris. And I think the one that kind of came closest to me was not one book, but a trilogy, which was John Dos Passos's USA trilogy, which, like, you know, similar to Small World, uses many points of view, as I did in West of Here as well. I love working with many limited points of view. So I just started scrawling mad notes in different colors, and I didn't even know why I was reaching for different colors and moving all over the room. They were like correlative lines of thinking, you know, I was like doing the mad scientist thing. But as I would step back, I started to understand what was going on. And I part of what I realized is that this had to be a novel that could sustain every color. You know, this had to be a novel that put diversity front and center, because when we talk about the American mythos, I mean, for 200 years of the literary canon, you know, so much of this mythos has been romanticized as, you know, just the arrival of European immigrants and you know, the captains of industry and manifest destiny. And so I wanted to take a good, honest look at all this stuff. And I wanted to write a novel that spoke both to the present moment in America, but also, you know, look back at the American experiment and ask the big questions, like, you know, is the American experiment made good on all its big promises? And so I thought, you know, I had to subvert a lot of the common mythology about the American, you know, dream and about manifest destiny, which really, if we're being honest, is just a kind of an extension of slavery, which is what this nation was built on. Manifest destiny, which, you know, all it gave us was really the native diaspora and genocide, but it was just an extension of slavery, and that it was exploitive labor. You know, I mean, exploitive labor, be it First Peoples or be it European or Chinese immigrants that built the railroads in opposite directions. I'm all over the place, so that's my elevator pitch. It's a long elevator ride, right? I'm not even halfway, but I guess my point
I'm
is
guessing
that
we're going to be doing a few more dips and turns, maybe going through some tunnel where there's rockets coming at us or something like that. So basically, it's four family timelines, right? So we've got the Chinese family, the Black family, the Irish family, and the Indigenous family. And I don't, you know, this is I'm going to confess I haven't read every book you've read, but I've read 3 now. So, and of course, every book you write, there's somebody at Boswell who's going crazy for it. Like, we always have a fan, you know, and so even when I haven't read it, I certainly know about it. And then I was trying to think to myself, have you ever written a book with one timeline?
No, I don't think so. They're not always bifurcated, but they always hop around. You know, when I first wrote that was the problem with This Is Your Life, Harriet Chance. The first time I wrote it is I wrote this really linear timeline about this 80-year-old widow living in her big house, and it was just stultifying. It was, and then she goes on a 7-day cruise, but it was very linear, and it was just so much of the book was just like Harriet looking out the window, Harriet, you know, looking longingly at her husband's empty slippers in a foyer, Harriet boiling some water to make tea, Harriet pouring the tea steaming up over her face as she looked back out the window. And it was just, I realized that, whoa, man, I'm missing a huge opportunity here, because it was a novel about reflection and memory. And I mean, these are nonlinear processes. So like, duh. So when I tried to turn that book in, my editor and my agent were just deathly silent. They hated it because it was just like, it was so linear and so one voiced. And then I finally had that realization that, you know, this is, if I ever had a great chance, I could just blow this thing up. And so that book ended up hopping all over Harriet's life with these triggers in the 4 story. That was the closest I ever came, I think. Everything, I like nonlinear timelines. I like to have at least 2 timelines working, because you can, you know, we're all kind of, in the West, we all process stories in this sort of, we're all kind of, whether we like it or not, we're all sort of beholden to Aristotelian dramatics still. This 3-act structure with the rising stakes and rising action and a climax and an annulment and stuff. When you have several timelines to work with, and better yet, several points of view, you can find so many ways to frustrate that so that it doesn't become predictable, as so many Hollywood movies do, because Hollywood movie is made basically a formula of Aristotelian dramatics. So when you have, the more elements you can introduce to the storytelling, the more you can surprise the reader. But really, at the end of the day, it's still always kind of a classical arc.
Well, in the, the contemporary timeline, everybody's on the Coast Starlight train. So, we know something's, whatever's happening in the back, it's gonna, we're still shooting through that tunnel. I just can't imagine. I'm passing to Lisa, but I just want to say, the way your brain works, I can't believe you even did write one, even in an early draft that was linear, because your brain is
I dropped 6 characters from this book too. I had Alejo Guzman and his ancestors too. I had a Mexican family lineage as well. Of
course you did.
Which belonged in there, but it had to go mostly because it was causing continuity problems. At the end of the day, I had these practical concerns, like how am I going to get everybody on that train? And I had to make everything coalesce. And for whatever reason, because of the way the Guzman stories unfolded, it was hard to fold them in, just for practical reasons, where they were and so forth. So I regret I had to kill some darlings to get through this one too.
Well, maybe they can be salvaged later, or maybe they can be bonus. Because I was guessing there was a Hispanic Latinx Mexican family in there somewhere. I knew how your brain thinks about that.
Yeah, and that's what the Western's about. I did save Alejo Guzman.
Oh,
that's what I've already finished the book. It's called Last of the Californias. It's a gold rush Western about Alejo Guzman. I expanded the character greatly, but I loved him. He was one of my favorite characters, so I couldn't get rid of him, but I gave him his own novel. So
I love that.
I did too.
Yeah, I can't forsake them, man. I can't forsake them. They live. Every character I've ever written is still alive in me. Like I know, Craig from west of here. People are like, why didn't you write a sequel? And I'm like, well, I don't need to, man. I know Craig's in Aberdeen right now. He's still coaching single A high school basketball. His team finished 3rd in the Seamount League last year. They were 11-9. He quit smoking pot. I still, in my head, he's still alive. They never end after the book.
Well, I think the Western would be great, and I know that we would have readers for that. So,
I think Westerns. Western might be mischaracterizing it a little. I think we'll see. Then I have that. I'm pretty excited about the other one, the other one I'm working on, which is a reincarnation narrative, because that's really fun. That's another kind of, I get to swing for the fences because I got the Moors in the 9th century. I've got the Aztecs. I get to be all over human history and try to find a way to make it all coalesce. I figured out how I'm going to do it, but I can't tell you.
I was going to go back to how you wrote it and the mapping. So I was glad that you talked about doing it all on these big sheets of paper, because I kept envisioning one of those animated maps of the US where the little journey would just kind of like the line would go across and then the line would go across over here and then they would meet. And each little step of the way and back and stuff. So it was really fun. Did you have to put it on a map to see where everybody was like? How did you keep track?
That was my idea for the book trailer. Exactly what you just said.
Oh, really?
Was to show the novel sort of coalescing. That's exactly, but we didn't do that. I mean, that's just so much animation. I like what they came up with, but that's exactly how I just visualized it in my mind. What was more important in terms of the outlining and the notes, the thing that was the most important is that with a cast this big, I never want to write a book that's got to have a persona dramatist at the beginning or a key where the reader has to stop and go, now, who is this person? I always want the reader to track, because you know how it is as a reader. I think like a reader more than a writer, I think, at this point. And I know as a reader, I'm just annoyed when I have to stop the immersive experience of the reading to go back and figure out how somebody is. So most of my notes and outlining was like, okay, I've got 12 limited points of view here. That means all the characters are going to be off the page besides whoever I'm dealing with at that time for 60, 70 pages at a time or something at times. So I had to really work hard at developing sort of a system of connectivity. You know what I mean? So that I could find subtle ways to persuade the reader to remember and keep in their consciousness these other things. And so that's all about connective tissue. And so sometimes that was geographical, sometimes it was genealogical, sometimes it was experiential, sometimes it was thematic, and sometimes it was coincidence. You know, I mean, that's one of the Dickensian elements about this novel. Everyone calls it Dickensian. And one of them is that, you know, it is kind of a small world. And there is room for coincidence in this novel.
And I should hand it back over to Daniel because
because especially we were talking about Dickens, and
that
was something you wanted to talk about. So
just that how all of the characters sort of hit together and do those sorts of things, and coincidence, and also a bit of serendipity too. I think not just these, and that did tie it together. So what I was going to end with is just the way the book itself is designed, with the characters' names so clearly at the beginning of each section, helps so much. And usually when I have the multiple ones, there's times where you want to just read one timeline, and never once did I feel that way.
Yeah, well,
never once did I jump ahead to read one character. You had the flow going so well. Did you write them separate, or did you really literally just go straight across with the bouncing?
I went straight across exactly because of what you said, because I didn't want that to happen for the reader. And I knew I'd be missing a lot of opportunities for connectivity thematically and in every other way if I just, you know, wrote them as separate things and tried to mash them together. It just doesn't work that way, because so much thematically, you know, I'm working through the novel too, you know, like, what am I trying to say here? And so, like, this is an organic process. And so, you know, it was so much easier to find the opportunities to tie things together when they were right next to each other. You know what I mean? And that's sometimes that's how I would decide who to go to next. It isn't always just rote, you know, it doesn't always just go, you know, Bergen, Flowers, Chen, Tully, you know what I mean? Sometimes I mix that up, and that was part of the organic process, is like where I was in the novel and how I could make them track and flow. I just wanted flow. I wanted to make this I just wanted to take a big risk. I wanted this novel to ruin my career if I didn't pull it off, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Because I like a high stakes game. I want the ball with 2 seconds left. That's what I get off on. That's the funnest part, is like the challenges that seem insurmountable and figuring those out. That's why I write. I mean, more than anything, it's just to grow as a writer and to have to develop new tools on the fly. And, you know, I did this with West of Here, where I had the bifurcated timeline and many characters. And I think I got better at it. They're different animals.
It did almost feel like, you know, having read West of Here, that you were like, you clearly really like doing it. You're like, okay, now I'm not doing Seattle. Now I'm doing, or Washington. Now I'm doing the whole country. Yeah. And you know, whatever, 2.0 or.
Yeah, well, because when I was writing West of Here, I was thinking of it as kind of a microcosm of all of America. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was just sort of a microcosm of the movement West and everything like that. So it was really easy in my imagination to expand it out further. So yeah, I mean, I totally kind of thought of this as like, I'm going to do something kind of like West of Here, but on a national basis, you know?
How long did it take for you? Did you know right away you were going to use the train, the Continental Railroad, and the train ride, and like the railroad, to tie it all together? And I had said this to you before, but it's like, I hope you have a $2 railroad hat somewhere.
Well, now you know what to get me for next Christmas.
I feel like I need to go somewhere. You know, Milwaukee used to have a, we have the Hiawatha. We just have one train coming through. But we used to have, Canadian Pacific had sort of a station here, like, and you could actually go once a week to a bar car that was just parked and just sit in a train and get like drink service and peanuts.
Fun.
But that was the best thing about Milwaukee.
I mean, I used to eat at the spaghetti factory all the time as a kid, because that's the only place our family could afford to, you know, feed a family of 7, was the spaghetti factory. And they had that going on too in San Jose, and also in Seattle. They had the train cars.
Oh, right. And that's why you have a spaghetti themed novel coming. It's novels from now, right?
Yeah, well, it's after the boxing novel, which is after the reincarnation novel, which is after the Western. And the novel that was going to be about the failing dental practice became a screenplay.
Mm-hmm. So did you know all along that was being connected, or did you have to come up with that?
I mean, that first night I realized, I mean, you know, as I realized that I wanted the novel to move east and west, that metaphor became pretty clear very early in the process, because also, like I said, I wanted to speak to the present moment, but I didn't want to write a political, I want to be political without being polemical. You know what I mean? I didn't, I don't want to write a guy, a neighbor with a Trump flag and all, I wanted to speak to that moment. And the best metaphor I could think of to speak to the, present moment was just a speeding train full of passengers headed towards oblivion. And that seemed to pretty much sum up the present moment all right for me. It's heading north in the novel. Now that I think about it, maybe it should have been headed south, but
Why?
Well, down south.
Oh, because maps are up and down.
No, because we're headed down the shitter, Daniel.
Oh,
I mean, that's how
well,
it feels. I mean,
but
anyway,
I'm sorry,
I'm
but-
actually very optimistic. This book, I intended it to be
Right.
sort of a salve for the moment. You know what I mean? I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think
this is a very optimistic and hopeful novel.
Yeah, no, that's the only kind of novel I know how to write.
Except for the people who die brutally, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little of that.
I mean, it's, this is one of those things I always think about is something is this a comedy? Is this a tragedy? Is this and the fact, one of the things I always say is like, there are some terrible things that happen in the book, no question, but and some awful characters. But once you start putting in all the coincidence and serendipity, you're sort of saying to the reader, it's going to be okay at the end.
We're all in this together. I think that what's lost in this mythos of the melting pot, pluralism is supposed to be our greatest strength as a nation. You know what I mean? And we've devolved all the way to this sort of tribalism. But like, I really only have one theme pretty much in all of my books, and that is that we're all connected in some way, and we're all beholden to each other, because to me, that's like the fundamental question of being human, is just alone or together. We're born alone, we die alone, but we're beholden to each other. And that isn't just the people right next to us in proximity. This is our ancestors. This is people that were, this stretches back thousands and thousands of years. I mean, there's nobody alive that invented the English language. We've just been passing this thing along collectively. And so I don't know, it just felt like a good time to remind everybody that, like it or not, as we're all tribal and the rhetoric is getting very ugly, that we really are in this together. And as far as the ugly rhetoric goes right now, I've been sort of likening it to, like, anybody who's ever been married can relate. Sometimes you get in an ugly brawl and you just say stuff you don't even mean. You know what I mean? You just say stuff to be mean because you want to win the argument or something. And I think there's a lot of that going on too. I mean, I think the rhetoric is uglier than the people in a lot of cases. I mean, there is some ugly people out there. We know that, but I didn't want to write a novel that just like puts an exclamation point. Yep. The world's fucked. The country's dead. There's nothing good about America. We suck. The end. I mean, I just don't see the purpose of writing that book,
And you took a really great time period to do that. I mean, the mid 1800s, there's so much going on, and so many like beginnings of, so many states coming in, so much with the manifest destiny, and then the railroad coming across. So you've got technology, and you've got land growth, and you've got people mushing together. And you write it, and I kept thinking, this is the amount of loss that everybody experiences. This is the tragedy. But yet, with all of this, everybody had something, and everybody, there was so many moments of gentleness and kindness and generosity without any strings attached. And that was, I think, that spirit that you're speaking to right now, is that kindness that was shown to characters.
I remember I got a great review in the New York Times. It was a wonderful review, but even she, the woman that reviewed it, she really got it, but she was like, it was hard for her to believe that this sort of altruism really exists. And that made me kind of sad for her in a way, because I don't have any trouble believing. I've been the beneficiary of it. And I've also given out that kind of I'm in that kind of guy, I've like given a homeless guy my car before, sometimes you're just moved to do something like that. And it does exist. And it's important to remember that it exists, I think. And I don't know, everybody's not going to feel as hopeful as I am.
But that history, our history that we learn in the school, does not touch on that kind of generosity. It touches on the other stuff, the things that the way that we move ahead when we squash people.
Well, immigrant cultures tend to really help each other out of necessity. Yeah. It becomes like an extended family or village. And so to me, it's not hard to believe that the Murphys who know they're not going to be able to get out of 5 points because the father's blind, and he's dying, and she knows they're never going to be able to, but like to without spoiling anything, to be able to help somebody else on their journey is, I don't find that hard to believe.
And Layla too, I've seen that kind of generosity before. Yes.
It's important to remember that exists. And about the period, it's interesting. I picked 1850 partially because I felt like it's kind of an underrepresented period of time, because everything usually comes after the Civil War, like most of the Western genre, most of the nation building. So many of the nation building narratives start at the time of the Civil War, after the Civil War. So I don't know. I felt like 1850 was a time that allowed me to, it also allowed me to have, because I had the gold rush on the West Coast and just the very beginnings of the railroad here. It allowed me, I wanted something on each coast so that the novel could sort of kind of coalesce and meet in the middle, and that just seemed to be the best period.
Yeah, I love that time period. It's really a very interesting time period. And too, I was going back and just looking at all the states that you were in and just how each one of them slowly joined in the Union during that time period. And then before that, we didn't have any real laws on immigration. And then it was, in 1875 with the Page Act.
Yeah.
So you caught that space where there was so much new and open and exploration and also lots of horrid things going on.
Yeah, like my mom was like, how come there's no Ellis Island? I'm like, Mom, there was no Ellis Island for like 20 years. I think Ellis Island was like 1873 or something. I don't remember exactly. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I abhor research, actually. I've gotten good at it, but I abhor it. I'm not the researchy guy. I don't, some guys just love to roll up their sleeves and go to the library. And I just like, I hate it.
Do you have somebody check for you afterwards then?
What's that?
Do you have somebody so you're writing like ragtime, like you're like, I'm just gonna wing it and see how it goes, but then do you check anything to make sure? Or is this
completely? Yeah, no, I have to do the research. I just said I hated it. I didn't say I didn't do it. I just say I don't enjoy it. It's like
do it.
Where I've gotten better at it is that I now know what I need to do in a scene. I handle it in a different way. With West of Here, for instance, I just read like 30 books, you know what I mean? And that just is a little overwhelming because you're discovering stuff that has nothing to do with the book you want to write. And you're like, God, man, I kind of want to include that. And so now, I kind of have an idea what I'm trying to achieve first. Then I know what questions to look for, and I can be much more focused about where I go for information and just on all levels, I have to look. I love to write outside the purview of my personal experience, but whenever you do that, the onus is on you as the author to get it right. Because, you hit one false note, you're going to lose the reader, you're going to offend somebody, or, so when I write outside of my gender or race or socioeconomic standing, or anytime I write outside my experience, luckily I'm blessed with a huge dynamic group of friends and associates and resources who I can have vet it. I've written combat veterans. I'm not a combat veteran, but I have friends who are. So I give them the material and say, listen, man, do not pull any of your punches. I cannot afford to have a single false note here. So just be brutal on me. And they are, They're like, this sounds like a fucking Navy Federal commercial. What the fuck's a chew? This is stupid. So anything, whether it's the racial stuff, I'm not an 80-year-old woman and I wrote Harriet Chance. Luckily, I have my mom there to help me vet it because she was an 80-year-old woman. And so I talked to a lot of railroad people. I talked to a lot of people in museums and so forth. I did a lot of book research as well, but it was more focused this time. It's like I knew what I needed. What's important to me is not to bore you with my knowledge of history, the breadth of my knowledge. I just need to get the details right. It's all about the reader just being in that moment and having it be credible and authentic and just trying to never hit a false note. So, but I don't like doing research. I just don't like it. It's just,
Well, you threw out I was going to ask about sensitivity readers. So obviously you did that. I also was going to ask, because of the way you did research, a lot of times in these books that have strong historical elements, there are real people woven in, some of the characters are based on real people, but it felt like none of these major characters are based on anybody real, right? These are all.
No. There's historical references that are really there just to help the reader with context and things like that. When I started doing the railroad research in terms of mergers and stuff like that, I quickly realized that, look, I can just make up the acronyms at some point. The point being that like everybody was consolidating. It was basically a pyramiding scheme to make money. And it didn't really matter if it was called the MMRIC or if it was the RMIC or that things like that. For a while, I tried to be really accurate with that. And then I realized it didn't matter. It was just going to get in the way of the story I was trying to tell.
Well, this is like when you said you had to change the name of Port Angeles and west of here. Like if you use the real place, you have to get all the details right. And the same thing in the railroad. If
you're always going to disappoint somebody by leaving something out. And so, yeah, I mean, I used real cities, obviously, Davenport and in Chicago and San Francisco and in New York. And that was some of the funnest research, was tracking down actual narratives from that period. It wasn't easy to find, actual descriptions of those areas then, to get that right. Because there are people out there that are far more historically, well-versed than me that will call me out on that stuff. So I had to, every little detail I try to, even now I'll find some guy that said, I'll use an idiom that wasn't, that idiom's 30, that wasn't around for 30 years. You know what I mean? So, I mean, but like when I watch Gangs of New York, I'm like, geez, all bets are off, because that movie was so historically inaccurate about 5 points, like just in so many ways. I mean, I was going to be a lot more careful than that, I hated that movie.
I never saw it.
I like the Onion. I don't know what it is. I just did not connect with that movie. I guess I don't like mobster movies in general.
Well, you did. And then, you know what? You really painted the texture of the scenes. You really get to feel like even the farm where they just couldn't get anything to grow because the soil was so bad. You don't think about, you just see that hardship and that hope and that perseverance. And yeah, the other point that I kind of thought you picked at with the American dream is that self-reliance. And what I liked how you sort of shifted or shook it up a little bit, and that we think it's such a virtue, which is something that's born into us, when it's really, you're showing that self-reliance did not necessarily come from this virtue. It is survival.
Yeah, and I don't really.
You need that, but you need the community. You can't be on this island,
absolutely. But
you have to be self-reliant, and part of that is knowing how to connect.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's like my one theme. I mean, that theme's in Lawn Boy, that theme's in Legends of the North Cascades, that theme is in West of Here, that theme is. I mean, I could write 20 more books and never get away from that theme. There's always some sub themes and other things, but that to me, again, is just kind of one of the fundamental questions about me.
Sometimes
I don't know how introverts survive. You know what I mean? I really don't. I mean, it's really hard for me to imagine being so introverted that I mean, because connection is what keeps me going. Is like authentic connection is the thing that keeps me alive and vibrant.
It's fascinating that you're so aware of the through line in your books, because so often I'll ask an author and they don't, like, I'll kind of have a handle on it and they're like, I don't know what I'm writing about. Or it'll be when they're like at 10 books, or, well, you might be at 10 books now, but
did you 17? It's just half of them weren't published. Yeah, 17 books, man.
Oh my God.
Not even hitting 500 yet, man. Until the next one. I think I got to publish 2 more and I'll be hitting over 500 finally. Because there were 7.
Do you think there's anything of the books you have now? Some books are in the pipeline effectively in your head, and some. So which ones? How many do you think are not salvageable of the 9?
Well, I'll tell you 3 that aren't salvageable. Those are the ones where I actually dug a hole, buried them, and salted the earth. They don't exist anymore. Which is my gosh. That was way more. That was way more than they deserved. You know what I mean? It was just more of a symbolic. They weren't good. I was like 18, 20 years old when I wrote them. But there's one called The Dream Life of Huntington Sales that I've come back to and tried to reinvent like 3 times. Nobody got it. Right. My agent was like, everybody could see something there. The center just never quite hold. And right in the middle of this situation where I'm trying to decide with Dutton which book we're going to publish next, because I've got 2, my agent decides like, man, that one you threw away 10 years ago, I've been really thinking about that. It seems so timely right now. I'm like, stop. God, you guys almost ruined my life making me throw that novel away. Now you want me to bring it back because it's timely because I was 10 years ahead of my time or something. So that one's still hanging around, but I don't think I'll ever try to save it. And some of the earlier ones I wrote in my late 20s, early 30s, I think are pretty good, but I'm already 5 years ahead. It's frustrating enough to.
If you were a normal person, you wouldn't be able to. You'd be like scrounging around for something because you wouldn't have an idea. But it sounds like you've got 300 more book ideas.
Because they're not ideas. We already know I have one theme. All I got to do is get on a bus and go, I want to write a novel about that guy. I mean, it's always just about character and theme. So I'm not a high concept guy. I don't conceive of a book like, like a Time's Arrow or something like where I'm going to tell this entire narrative backwards or,
I love backwards novels. You
I
can
like
write
it
a backwards novel.
I like it too. What I'm saying is it's not as hard for me to generate the sort of ideas that I work with because they're not high concept, highly developed ideas. It's more
Your brain is just the kind of brain that could write a backwards novel.
I know, but
isn't the one you were talking about the one that has a little bit of the magic in it?
The reincarnation one?
The reincarnation one. Thank you.
Yeah, what about it?
Isn't that sort of backwards?
Well, yeah, in a sense. I mean, but I know the crux of the novel and I can't tell you because it will ruin it for everybody. But
right.
Called Again and Again. I thought I was going to call it Again and Again and Again. And I thought, let's just Again and Again.
I want 4 agains.
I thought about that too.
Okay.
I thought about again and again and again and again and again and again all the way down the front cover of the novel, but
maybe with an asterisk and a bunch of agains later.
Sure. Footnotes.
Or just 4 again.
So it's not about big ideas for me. It's about characters, I mean, there's no shortage of characters. And for me, it's just about taking a flawed character that wants something and just sort of like setting them free in this basically this narrative landscape that's just trying to kick them in the face with a Kodiak steel-toed boot the whole time, and them trying to navigate that and then making decisions that then complicate that journey. And then there's 2 Kodiak boots trying to kick them in the face and just trying to get them maybe like a third of the way through. And that's what hope looks like. So, I mean,
I would love for you, because I know a lot of people, the book's still fairly new. A lot of people haven't read it. I want them all to read it. And I would love for you to talk a little about each family and like what you were hoping to do. Like what's the starting point for each family, or what's the, like the nugget, the rest, the whatever, like of the Flowers, the Chens, the Bergens, and the Tullys.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I think the novel has so much narrative momentum, besides the fact that there's a speeding train that is doomed from the very first page, is that these characters are forced by circumstance into movement immediately. And this, to me, is a big part of the American ethos we don't talk about enough. This is just sort of this being forced into action and movement. So the Bergens arrive. To the port of New York, fleeing the famine in Ireland, and the idea is to get them to Chicago. Without spoiling much, they make it to Chicago, but then I can't say anymore. I don't want to spoil it.
No, I know, it's nugget, not the whole thing.
The Bergen mother, who they've already lost their father. She brings a set of fraternal twins to the port of New York, and their goal is to get to Chicago. With George, well, his slave name is Othello, and he later changes his name to George, and we won't even say that because that's what he changes his name to, because that's a kind of a spoiler as well. But he flees, he flees slavery in the middle of the night in Peoria, Illinois. So he's forced into movement right away. Wu Chen has a gold claim, in Central California, and his claim is jumped, and he watches as the Huang brothers are killed. His 3 partners are killed, and he's sort of cowering in the bushes and he goes through life thinking he's a coward because he didn't do anything, even though he's outnumbered 5 to 1 and so forth. And so he's forced to he knows where everybody's gold stash is kept in a rabbit warren. And so he eventually ends up with that fortune, but that's his legacy, you know, that legacy of violence and stuff like that. And with Leila Tully, or Luyu Tully, was a Miwok who was displaced in the massacre at Sutter's Mill during the gold rush. And she is then displaced and raised by a Methodist family. And when she's 16 years old, she goes to town one day and decides that she's going to leave that life to go find a life of her own. And so all the characters are forced into sort of trying to discover their destiny right from the get-go. Whereas the modern characters, Walter Bergen is the engineer of the train. He's the 5th generations removed from the twins. He's the retiring train engineer who is on his, his final run on the Coast Starlight, running up the West Coast. And then Malik Flowers is a young basketball prep high school phenom whose mother Brianna is raising him as a single mom. And it's a real struggle for them to come up to the money to get there because she loses her job when she's propositioned she has to get a payday loan basically to get the money to get the train ticket and the hotel room and so forth. And then Luyu, who is 5 generations removed from, or Layla, who's 5 generations removed from Lulu, is fleeing a bad domestic situation from an abusive boyfriend. And she heads north to go live in Queets, where her cousin may or may not be able to get her a job at a lodge. And then who am I forgetting?
The Chens, the
Chens, and yeah, 5 generations later, I mean, Wu Chen has made well with, they opened a number of grocery stores, and that went on for several generations. And Jenny basically has a pretty high paying job at Amtrak, who's, so that ties into Walter and the train, but she's basically a corporate fixer, she does layoffs and makes things, and she's dealing with really being unhappy with her life because they live in Hayes Valley in San Francisco in a $2 million condo. And but her husband is just progressively less and less happy, and she's not happy with her job. And so they're, her husband is sort of in love with this idea of being new pioneers and just wants to move back to Central Oregon where he grew up and lived on a farm. And so that's their journey. So everybody's moving. All the characters are moving. And I think that's one of the keys to why the novel has so much momentum, because everyone is on a journey and the stakes are as high as they can possibly be. And obviously there's just so many obstacles, not the least of which is financial. I think I did it, right?
You did it.
So.
I carried it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
A literal and figurative journey for all of them.
And it flows. It holds all together too.
I want to let's take a question from our good buddy Dave Mulman. Great novel. So much fun to make the characters and connections. There's one item, a piece of jewelry, that does not end up with the person you expect, and it was fascinating to see how that came about. What made you do that? I think I know what, I actually also thought about that. Like, when's it coming? When's it coming? And one of the things that's so interesting about the book is sometimes you chose to have like home run, basket swoosh, and sometimes you decided to make them kind of near misses. Like you wanted it to go like that.
Yeah.
How did you decide when you were going to do that? And and how did you know?
Well, so much of it has to do with, as I was saying earlier about this book, I think more than any of my books, I was really tuned into the reader on this one. I mean, I really look at it as a dance between the writer and the reader. They're doing everything backwards. They're doing everything I'm doing backwards and heels. I'm feeding out this information and creating expectations for them. So I have to be very careful about, very hyper aware of what information I'm giving out in the narrative at any given time. And this allows me to do things like misdirect and so you're asking why I do that. It's because I want to subvert the reader's expectation at some point. I want to create that expectation, sort of subtly persuade them to expect something. And then, because I love that as a reader, again, I love convergences. I love to be surprised. I love when I'm right too. You want to be right some of the time too, because you feel real smart and stuff like that. all these satisfactions I get as a reader. I wanted to write a book that did all that. The locket is a very interesting case because actually, you know, I didn't add the locket until the very final draft. I added, and it was so easy at that point to reverse engineer it in. This is another thing that I think is so amazing about Dickens, is that Dickens never could reverse engineer everything because everything he wrote was serialized. So he never had what I consider to be one of the greatest tools. Sometimes I don't even know what the book's about until the first draft is done. Then I have to reverse engineer everything in. But by the time I finished with it, I was in pretty good control. The last couple drafts were all about finding these opportunities for connective tissue, finding ways to connect all the characters besides the train, besides the other things that were already in the book. And I found an opportunity with the blue locket that I just went through. And I thought, you know, if I start the blue locket here and it goes here and it takes on this meaning, and we're going to put the letter L on it. And for Finn, that's going to mean love. And oh shoot, I'm going to do a spoiler here. Never mind. I can't say anything else. I'm sorry.
I think you've already read the book.
You'll know what I'm getting at. Whoever asks the question will get it. But like the blue locket, I actually added at the end. I mean, it's so much of it is just reverse engineering, you know?
I have a question as a reader too about the names, because one of Malik's friends is named Haskins, which is an unusual first name. And I didn't know if perhaps it was a nod to Coach Haskins.
No, Haskins is his last name. They just call each other by last names because they're ball players. A lot of times.
Yeah, but was it a nod to Coach Haskins? No, yes.
Well, yeah, Haskins is definitely a basketball name. I mean, yeah. And then what was Coach Haskins' first name? Because there's also Dwayne Haskins too.
It was Don Haskins, at Texas Western.
Okay, it's a basketball name for sure.
Okay. Dang, I thought I caught one of those eggs.
Yeah, there's a lot of Easter eggs. If you went to high school with me, you'll really catch a lot of them. I'm always putting people in my high school yearbook in there, you know, because they buy like 10 books. That's why I do it. They all buy like 10 books. Like, yeah, look, I'm in this book.
Speaking of which, so we can't really ask the other question because it really is, it is a,
spoiler.
I should one say a spoiler.
Yeah.
But did you, I mean, there are some characters, like I think we were saying this before, that you hope will connect and just don't connect. There's two major characters somebody referred to. And I think what you're saying is like sometimes you wanted the reader to say yes, and sometimes you wanted to confound them.
Yeah. Well, you know, I never really go for the Hollywood ending because I don't think it's necessary. You know what I mean? I think just giving a little hope is, I mean, I think as human beings, we almost always fall short, you know, of our expectations and our goals and our wishes. And
you know something, you did a fabulous job of answering the question for that person without us having to say what the question is.
Well, I know exactly what you're saying too. It's the crux of the whole novel, so I got to be very careful with that one.
It is.
What are you reading right now, or what have you been reading, or do you write so much, like at 3 kids, 700 books?
I'm about to start. I just finished Bill Rohrback's Lucky Turtle from Algonquin. I love Bill Rohrback. It's wonderful. It's about a girl who's at she's basically consigned to a camp because of some criminal activity in Montana. It's a wonderful love story, and also a love story to the natural world. I'm about to start Stuart Onan's Ocean State, which I read anything by Stuart. He's just a master, but I haven't started it yet. I'm writing a book by a woman. I'm reading a book from my blurb pile right now by a woman named, I think it's Davida Breer, that's published by the University of New Orleans Press, which is kind of a gritty coming of age. I'm enjoying that. What else?
How high is the blurb pile?
Probably 6 or 7 books at any given time.
Okay.
So when we talk about generosity and altruism, I believe in it. You know what I mean? I've been turned down. I've been turned down by people whose books I've blurbed 3 times and they still don't blurb mine. But you can't think that way. I know how much these blurbs mean to young writers, and I know how that they help create a little, you know, visibility within the house. And I just know how much they mean to them. And so I'm never going to stop doing that. at some point, I'm not good at saying no, but I mean, there's a certain point where I'm like, look, I'll try, but my good
You can
intention.
only read, unless you're doing the Gary Steingart, the famous, read the book. You can't do them all. You can only read so many books.
Yeah, I've blurbed about 200 books, and there's a few that I haven't finished just because the deadline was so tight. But in which case, I can always say something about the writing or the writer. You know what I mean? I do my damnedest because I don't like to let people down, and I want to. I mean, as somebody who's been turned down a lot myself, I know what that generosity means because it's the worst ask in the world. Anybody who's not in the industry may not know how. I mean, just imagine trying to beg. I mean, it's just like trying to panhandle almost. You feel so bad asking for somebody because you know they're working on their own book and you know they're busy and they all the stuff you've got, they've got too. And it's just such an awkward ask that God, just to get that, yeah, no problem, is just such a relief. You hardly ever get it. So I like to give it every time, like with the caveat that, listen, my good intentions may fail me just because I don't humanly have enough time, but I'm always going to try. And so, I mean, it's a sacrifice in the sense that I don't always get to choose what I'm reading. You know what I mean? It would be nice to have the luxury, like there's so many novels that come out and I'm like, God, I wish they'd ask me for a blurb because then I'd have to read it kind of thing.
As booksellers, the only thing we ask is that there be some sort of through line between the books you write and the book that you're reading, you know, that you're writing for. Like sometimes to me, when I see a blurb and it's just gonna disappoint a reader. If the person thinks if I read this book, I'll read this book. And then and I'll see some of the worst like Goodreads reviews. It's when somebody was promised something that is just not there. I mean, it could have been a really great book. It could have been an amazing book, but it didn't come from that blurb.
Right. Most all of my blurb requests, I'd say generally come from people, working class narratives. Because, you know, I'm always writing about working class people for the most part. So they usually kind of, that's where that intersects.
They hit them together. That's
happens.
Cool.
Or if they write about a caregiver or, you know, if it's a caregiving novel. So they're usually on point. I mean, once in a while you'll get one out of left field and you're like, it's a Botus Ripper. And I'm just like, are you sure you want me to blurb this book? I don't know if it's apropos.
Lisa, do you have a last question?
Do I have a last question? Are we already at that time? And you asked my usually last question.
Close. Yeah.
Was we talk?
You can ask two. How many beers did you
my
get?
Clock, 20 minutes of beer.
Oh. Go on, Lisa.
Did you have any surprises when you were researching or finding any bits for the characters or the characters that were left behind? Something that you sort of had to leave out, but really fed the texture of the story?
I had a lot of those in West of here. I can't really think of too many in this because I like I said, I think the difference in the process here is I had a really good, I think I had a really good idea who my characters were going in. And I think in West of here, the idea was a little bit to show how the history had shaped them more. And so I attacked it from a sort of a different angle. So I don't, and in doing so, I think I was more focused in my research. So like it happened a million times in West of here. Like I found out fascinating stories about Port Angeles that who knew, you know, I grew up here and I didn't even know that I had to leave out. But yeah, not as much with this one, just because of the sort of focused nature of the way the research went.
Yeah. Okay. There's my last question. Daniel, do you have a last question?
I have a whole page of questions, but I'm going to leave that to some of the 17,000 other interviews that you have to do over the next month.
We have one last one. We got one on the chat here or from David Mullman, I think.
Oh, no, we did, Dave. We did.
Oh, we did?
I have one. One of the things I noticed is that while there's some really awful people in the book, you have trouble. You really can't. I was thinking about you writing villains, like real villainous characters. How do you feel about that? Yeah, it's hard, isn't it?
I honestly don't think anybody's that black and white. You know what I mean? I honestly I'm always trying to look, and I get disappointed a lot. You know what I mean? People end up disappointing me a lot, but I just shrug it off. You know what I mean? I just for my own, you know, worldview and everything else, I want to look for the best in people. And maybe sometimes they're going to disappoint you or whatever. So even in my, I mean, like I mean, Worthy Warnock, for instance, is just, he's a horrible.
About as awful as you can get.
Yeah, there's really nothing redeeming about him. The only way I could redeem him for me was to sort of write him with this sort of light on my feet, jaunty Dickensian tone sometimes that made him so disgustingly bad that it was almost an affectionate sort of contempt. You know what I mean? Like the whole thing with wrapping his toes and things like that. I was to write him with that sort of Dickensian flair made it easier for me to accept what a horrible person there was. But and generally speaking, I try to, I honestly don't think everybody's all good or all bad. I mean, I just think it's there's gradients. I mean, certainly people can skew more one way than the other, but I'm trying to, I mean, I think characters are more, there's that old saying about how like, the hero and the villain feel fear in equal measure. You know what I mean? Or feel cowardice in equal measure. I don't remember what it was, but it's about the decisions people make. When they make bad decisions, that makes them bad people. Bad people can make good decisions and all of a sudden they're good people. You know what I mean? We
do tend to backwards. You were talking about reverse engineering with the locket, and I think we so often reverse engineer morality.
Oh yeah, for sure. Hollywood's really good at it. I mean, that's kind of Hollywood, right? I mean, just pretty much every redemptive Hollywood story, sure. Well, and I like that because the worse the character is, the easier they are to redeem, right? Sorry, I'm not going to stop. We're going till 7. My time. We're on my clock now. No, but like the harder the more flawed the character is, the harder they are to redeem, the more I sort of like to write the character,
But I just love that you called him Worthy.
Well, I met a guy I hope he doesn't sue me. I met a guy at a reading. Him and Ben Fountain were the only 2 people show up at this reading in Dallas. And my friend, Lisa Stridle. 3 people showed up to this reading. And I think it was Interbang Books in Dallas.
Oh, sure.
And one of them was this guy sitting in the 3rd row. You know how that goes. There's 60 chairs, but only 3 people. And Ben's right down front with Lisa. And then there's this guy in the 3rd row. And of course, I had plenty of time to talk to him because there's only 3 people there. And his name was Worthy Warnock. And I'm like, dude, the minute I'm like, I'm sorry, man, but I'm using that name as my Southern gentleman at some point. I feel bad because he's kind of a crappy character. And this guy was super nice. But like that name was just so perfect. And I have another friend named Lee Leatherwood, who I used as the sheriff in my next book. Because is there a better name for a Western sheriff ever in your whole life named Lee Leatherwood?
Every parent who names their child with an alliterative name should know that their name will probably be stolen for a book one day.
Yeah, alliterated names are good.
To their detriment. Or
sometimes alliteration is not enough. And like Ben Benjamin, you have to give him the same name twice.
That's,
Or Humbert.
Humbert. There you go. All right.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
I look forward to being
pleasure.
back to both of your stores in real time sometime. And
someday.